Hello and welcome to Talk 2 on the mystery of Holy Week. Now, the reason why Holy Week is so important is that Jesus himself repeatedly says throughout the Gospels that this is the hour for which he has come into the world. And in fact, to lay that foundation, I would like to read for you a particular passage in John's Gospel that is situated also in, roughly speaking, this very particular period in Holy Week. Soon after Jesus is anointed by Mary in Bethany, then Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and then the whole crowd gathers to hear him because they have witnessed his raising of Lazarus from the dead. So chapter 12, verse 7, starting in verse 17. The crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead bore witness. The reason why the crowd went to meet him was that they heard that he had done this sign. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see that you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him." Now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So those came to Philip, and who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew went with Philip, and they told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there shall my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him." This has many dimensions to it. First, Jesus gives that statement, those who love their life will lose it. Then he says that anyone who serves will follow him and will be where he is. This means that if we have his heart, then we will want to be where he is, which, as he's indicated, his hour leads to the cross, his glorification. And so it should be our desire to share his desire, just as his desire is a reflection of the Father. As Jesus will say to his apostles at the Last Supper, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." So he, being the perfect reflection of the Father, gives us an occasion of obeying the Father by obeying him. This then makes the invisible God visible, which was his mission, which was his goal, which is what his purpose. Now, knowing this hidden purpose of Christ is essential to knowing his personality. Because to love him as a person, you must know him. Now, one of those interesting bits about our Catholic life is that to understand its full dimension is that you can't quite do it entirely in a philosophical or theoretical manner. That there is a different skill that is required to get at the heart of Christ, and it is connected with the narrative. That although the story of Christ is historical, and therefore real and has real tangible reality to it, the skill of interpreting his person is very similar, not the same, but it's similar to the skill in terms of understanding a human person. That is why, being made in God's image and likeness, we practice on a temporal level, in a visible level, understanding the person of God, or understanding the person that we encounter by their motives and their actions. Now, why is Jesus so fixated on the passion and death? Why is it that that's his only goal? And, in a sense, unpleasant as it may be. Well, G.K. Chesterton, one of my favorite authors, understands this point and tries to explain it in the sense that only the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, only that, interpreted in the light of his full divinity and full humanity, makes the story even at all tenable. And so that is why the passion, death, and resurrection is of such importance. It's through that lens that we see his full humanity and his full divinity. Because in the prior signs of healing a man born blind or turning water into wine, you can picture, if you use your imagination, a magician doing those things. In fact, we do heal people sometimes who are blind with modern science. And sometimes we might even get close to raising someone from the dead. But the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ reveals something else. That strange dual nature that he has. Which is why the subsequent passage from that reading that I just gave you is where Jesus says this: "Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. For this purpose I have come to this hour. Father, glorify thy name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing by heard it, and said that it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, and not for mine. The judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." He said this to show by what death he was to die. The crowd answered him, "We have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Jesus said to them, "The light is with you for a little longer. Walk while you have the light, lest the darkness overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he goes. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of the light." Now you notice the duality in the very beginning when Jesus says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour." So it shows you that the weight of the moment is real. And you see not a human person, but someone who is fully human, who's approaching a trial of tremendous significance. And yet the subsequent part reveals his confidence in the Father, that even the words of consolation of the Father to him are not even for him, but are for the people who hear it. Because the people who hear it need to see both intention. If you do not hear Jesus expressing, "Now my soul is troubled," then we would doubt his humanity. And yet, unless we hear the voice of the Father and Jesus saying that it's our benefit, not his, then we do not see the full lens of his divinity. And it's not as if he's one at one moment and one at the next moment. It's both. And only that both makes this story work. I began to realize the significance of how to look at it this way when I started to realize that when nerds are fighting over Star Wars or Star Trek or comic book characters and trying to discuss who would win in a fight, Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader or Kylo Ren, or Hulk or Superman, that what they're trying to do is to figure out the nature of the character and what their powers represent. And it's important then to realize is that small practice, that small skill is then meant to bring up to this larger one. And using the character of Superman, I want to kind of explain how this also works in a different dimension. That power doesn't fix all of humanity's problems. In fact, Superman himself is hamstrung by his power. There are many things that he can't be. His great power is not that he can fly and do all these other things, but that he wants to be human, but can't. And not only that, his stories are boring. He can stop crime. He can reverse time by going around the earth. But he can't be moved and becomes so gradually disassociated from reality itself. He's almost like a Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen, who, because of power, loses his humanity. But that is because our image of power is wrong. It's not that God is not powerful. It's not that Christ is not powerful. Christ is greater than any of these mythic figures. And so fully embraces the full dimension of our humanity so as to bring it to its fulfillment, which is the whole point of this Holy Week. The drama of Holy Week is his hour to make divinity fully revealed in humanity. But the hard part is, as I said, is to smash the false gods. And so corresponding with the revelation of the true God is the ending of the false gods. And that is to pick up and to develop Israel's mystery and mission from the very beginning. Israel was always called to be a light to the nations. But the first element is their being called out of the nations, to be revealed as distinctive from the world. Then, after they are revealed as distinctive from the world, they are meant to be then distinctive for the world. Is that it's not that God chose them simply for their own sake, but that he chose them for the sake of others. Now, the feasts of Israel are all designed to bring out the multidimensional reality of Israel's vocation in life. Now, the oldest of all the feasts is Passover itself, which is where we get the term Paschal. They're being called out of slavery to being formed as a people is the fundamental or basic mystery. But there's more to it than that. Because after they are called out of slavery, then there is another dimension, which is their wandering in the wilderness. Now, that wandering in the wilderness of being guided by God and God's providence is also symbolized by another Jewish feast, the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. Now, in Jesus' time, that feast was predominantly connected with the wine harvest. And it was several days of festivity and also rejoicing in God's continued providence for his people. The Feast of Pentecost was also connected with the Feast of Passover because it was to be celebrated 50 days after the Passover celebration. Because the way in which the freedom of Israel and God's continual presence in their midst was designed to foster relationship. Now, that relationship is symbolized in the law. Because God then, by calling them into freedom, and it's only in the basis of that freedom, then they can respond freely to God's invitation. And so throughout Israel's history, the following of the law becomes, in a sense, symbolic of their following of God. And of course, the first and utmost commandment is to reject the worship of false idols. All of the other commandments flow from that first commandment. Because our temptations to adultery, to stealing, to theft, to murder, to greed and envy, all of these things flow from a false idol. If we are willing to break the sixth commandment, it means that we place more trust in pleasure than in God to fulfill our hearts. The same thing goes with covetousness. If we're willing, for instance, to steal, cheat, or lie in order to secure goodwill or reputation, then we have already surrendered ourselves to the yoke of idolatry. One is the symptom, the other is the real problem. But of course, what becomes abundantly clear once God gives the law to Moses through Moses to Israel, is that there's a part of the human heart that resists God's love so profoundly. The very moment God is giving the law to Israel and bestowing upon them the covenants, Aaron, the high priest, and the whole nations then begin to worship a false idol. And God then reveals the other portion of his heart. Portion, that's a terrible word. God can't be divided into parts. The deeper motive, let's use that Chestertonian language. The deeper motive of God's heart is not our mere obedience, but our trust in him. And the ultimate sign of our trust in him is not that we successfully follow the law, that's important, but that we call upon his mercy. That the plan of God in calling a people, naming them, guiding them, protecting them, has a motive that is yet unseen. In fact, that mercy is revealed when Moses says to God, challenges God, uses God's own name against God by saying, remember the good things that you did for them. Do not let it be a waste, and do not let your name be a byword, lest the nations say that God brought them out of captivity into the wilderness simply to die. Because that's a corollary of a God's covenant. The failures of Israel, strangely, become God's failures. The failures of Israel becomes God's failures. Just as our failure to accept, proclaim, and believe the faith that we've been given in Christ makes the proclamation of his gospel difficult to accept by the world. So the commemoration of this mystery of mercy in Israel is the feast of Yom Kippur, which is the most important feast in Israel. Now, while Passover is fundamental and foundational, Yom Kippur, in a sense, is the end, because that is the Day of Atonement, the Day of Mercy. Now, today it's celebrated a little bit differently, but in Jesus' time, it would involve the high priest entering the deepest sanctuary and, after offering sacrifices for his own sins, then on behalf of the sins of the whole world, makes an offering of atonement before the altar of God, that altar that we heard about last time, and says God's name. And in the utterance of God's name before God, then occasions the forgiveness of sins. But this is also really important. Israel knew that it is God's desire to grant the things that they are petitioning for. It is not the blood of bulls and goats that grants the forgiveness of sins. It is God himself who wishes to accomplish it. Now, all of these rituals and all of these practices are meant to engage the will. Because if human beings do not make an action, and if that action doesn't have a corresponding cost, then you always have to question whether or not our faith is mere words. Emptiness. Do we have a trust in the fact that what God is accomplishing in us is his power and not ours? Which is why another very important feast in the Jewish calendar happens every week, Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is more than just a lazy man's dream. Sabbath, and inside of it, has a wisdom that you only get when you actually do it. And it's this. Everything you do is inadequate to the glory of God. What God wants from you, more than anything, is you. Your presence. The temptation to break the Sabbath, to do servile work, is the very root of slavery. because it becomes our identity, who we are. And we can see this in our own culture today, either in the midst of this pandemic, or, for instance, when somebody goes into retirement. When somebody retires, for instance, I don't immediately congratulate them. Because for some, it's an identity crisis. And it's very painful. It's very hard. Just in the same way, when you are overcome by anxiety and says, I know I really shouldn't be shopping, or I know I shouldn't be doing this, or I know I shouldn't be doing this on a Sunday, I should be praying and spending time with my family and going to Mass and all these other things, then what do we usually say? Yes, but this is really important. Now the Sabbath also has a corollary, which is called the Day of Preparation, which is the Friday, where you do all of the work on the Friday that you need to have done on the Saturday, which immediately trains the Jew, and hopefully the Christian, to plan, to not just be impulsive, but to plan and to think, and then to also be able to be still. That is very, 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 very hard. So when Jesus, for instance, is breaking the Sabbath, he's doing it with a very specific mindset. Not that he's relaxing the rules. You'll notice that constantly when Jesus is having the Sabbath narratives, especially in John, he uses the word work all the time. My Father is working. The point is to say is that creation itself is still a work in progress. That all of the work begun in Israel, represented by these feasts, are coming to their crescendo in him. And you'll notice, and if you read really closely in John's Gospel, all of the miracles and signs are correlated in some degree with a different feast. The raising of Lazarus happens soon after the feast of the dedication in the temple. There's the Feast of Booths, repeatedly mentioned. Passover happens 3 times. Sabbath is constantly discussed. Now, the giving of the law happens later. But you'll notice that by situating all of these stories within the Jewish history and the Jewish life, Jesus is revealing what their ultimate purpose is: to train Israel to learn how to accept the Messiah and to understand who he is. Which then also helps us then understand the tragedy of a guy like Caiaphas. When Jesus begins his public ministry, up until the raising of Lazarus, there is a growing disquiet among the authorities that Jesus is dangerous, and they're right. He is very dangerous. After Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Caiaphas lets it out. They don't disbelieve in him. They're worried what he will bring upon Israel if he continues preaching. Caiaphas, in fact, says that if he keeps preaching, then the Romans are going to come and destroy our nation and to destroy our way of life. And therefore it is better that Jesus die for the nation rather than the nation die because of him. Now, the tragedy of Caiaphas is multiform. First, it reveals that he is the ardent defender of a faith he doesn't believe. Caiaphas doesn't actually believe that the promises of God will work for the good of Israel, which is why he's lying, which is why he's covering up facts, which is why by covering up facts, he wants to kill Lazarus, because Lazarus is the evidence that Jesus is the Messiah. And that even if he does recognize that God is working works through Jesus, he wants to cover them up because of the danger that they represent. A great literary analog to this figure is the inquisitor in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. I spent the last few weeks describing the inquisitor in the book about Japan. Now that book represents, the inquisitor in Silence represents nature trying to keep God out. But the inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov, like Caiaphas, represents a society that claims to accept God, and through its inquisitor rejects him. Because the inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov recognizes and understands, and recognizes and finds Jesus in his kingdom, in his society, and actively says, "You are too hard on people. You are too hard on the people." So rather than having people freely respond to the gift of faith, we will use authority, mystery, and miracle to subvert them, so that they do not have to feel the weight of choosing God, of accepting him. That underlying cynicism of the inquisitor and of Caiaphas is a perpetual danger for us Catholics. When we want to have a nice and tidy Christian religion without the cross, without Holy Week, without the glory, the whole story of the glory. For just as Chesterton warned us that we often create a fake God according to our own fancy, then sometimes too we can also reject the true God because of our false gods. And so what the Passion is that God takes in himself all of our desires, all of our hopes, and all of our dreams, and has them die in himself, so that they may be brought to new life. All the festivals of Israel, but also the hopes and the dreams of the Greeks, representing the whole world. You'll notice that the apostles that come to Jesus, it goes in a certain order. So the Greeks come to Philip, and then it goes to Andrew, and then it goes to Jesus. But you'll notice that in their names, you see the chain. Philip is a Greek name. In fact, Philip is the name of Alexander the Great's father. Now, I'm not saying that Philip is named after that guy, but you see the origin of where the names come from. And then Andrew is the brother of Peter. So he's definitely much more of the Judean stock. And yet, there's a chain. The Gentile goes to the one who's closest to him, which would be a more Greek-speaking Jew. And then the Greek-speaking Jew goes to the Judean Jew. And then the Judean Jew goes to the source. And then Jesus declares that now the time has come. For as the priests themselves said earlier, the whole world is going after him. And indeed, that's the point. In every story, in every feast, in every celebration, in anything that is good, there is an echo of Christ. But know this, they're all echoes of the real story. They're all echoes of the real Savior. Don't interpret Christ based on a story that you know. Interpret the stories based on him. And do not worship a Jesus that makes you comfortable. Worship the Lord who both consoles and disturbs. Because if we know anything about ourselves, we need comfort. But we also need to repent. God bless you, and see you next time.